Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast has evolved over the 5+ years since it first launched. From now on, I'm going to be talking about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. And also mindset, of course, but mindset of all kinds, not just business mindset. I think. Things are changing for me, as you may have noticed if you've been following me online or listening to this podcast, so anything goes here. I hope you stay along for the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today, and now let's get into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 330. This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. Today, I'm going to talk about self-trust, inner compass. And this is something that I've touched on before in episode 285, which was on how to trust in yourself and trust that everything is working out. And I think that was a pretty good episode, but I was just going through the show notes for that and looking at the bullet points. And what I want to talk about today is a little bit different. So I hope you find this interesting and useful. Self-trust is something that's been on my mind lately because I just finished reading this really, really good book by Debbie Mirza, M-I-R-Z-A. I don't know how you pronounce that, but it's called The Covert Passive-Aggressive Narcissist, Recognizing the Traits and Finding Healing After Hidden Emotional and Psychological Abuse. I can't remember the last time I underlined, highlighted so many things in a book. Like so much of this, it was so helpful. So, as you probably know, because I've hinted at this before, for about a decade of my life, I got way off track in life. I got involved with a person who was, I think, a covert, overt, hybrid narcissist, because apparently people can be both. So this was a person who, to some people, was very obviously a narcissist. To other people, they couldn't see through the mask. And they just thought this was a really great person, like super charming, but also super manipulative. And I'm taking responsibility for this in the sense that I co-created this situation, this decade of hell, with this person, and I'm partly responsible for it. But the point is, I got way off track with life. I allowed myself to be manipulated, and I allowed myself to experience abuse, and I allowed myself to experience a really shitty 10 years of my life. And this is important. Because of the gaslighting that was going on in this relationship, I lost my trust in myself. I just completely lost it. I did not trust myself. I trusted the other person. I just felt completely out of touch with myself, completely lost within myself, like a shell of crap. And I remember during that time reading a lot of business and marketing books, and I came across this book by Bill George, which is called Discover Your True North. It's a really good leadership book that teaches you how to find your inner compass, your true north, and use that in kind of corporate business leadership settings. And I remember reading this book and thinking, oh, that sounds amazing. Like, I would love to have that for myself. And of course, I read the book, which talks about how to do it, but it was like it didn't feel like it was possible for me. I was just so out of touch with myself. So that was 10 years of my life. And then the last 10, 11 years of my life have been a lot about recovering that, about recovering my true north, about recovering and actually not recovering, really just developing it for the first time, because I don't think that my inner compass was that strong to begin with, because I think if it were, I wouldn't have allowed myself to get in that situation and make the decisions that led me to that situation. So the past 10, 11 years have been more about building my inner compass, developing my inner compass from probably next to nothing. So I wanted to share this with you because, as I said, these things have been on my mind because I just read this book, and I really think that life is life is so different when you have an inner compass, when you have a true north, when you trust yourself deeply and completely. And I think that's why, with my heart-centered energy work, one of the most important parts that we work on in heart-centered energy work is self-trust. And when we do the balance for the heart center, it's about self-love and self-acceptance and self-trust, because those are three really important pillars to having a great life. If you don't trust yourself, you make bad decisions, you probably very unhappy. Life is really difficult, but when you do trust yourself, everything just flows so much more smoothly. It's a huge difference. But as I said, this is something that's taken me years to develop. Again, coming from a very, very dark place. Most people listening to this probably won't be in that bad of a situation. At least I hope not. If you are, I'm really sorry. Feel free to drop me an email and we can chat. Not from a professional perspective, not trying to sell you sessions because I'm not really doing sessions these days, but just to see if I can give you some resources that maybe you don't have available to you. Because when I was in that situation, I really didn't have resources. I mean, yes, there was the internet, but it was like, I just didn't see how bad it was. And I didn't even know how to put words to what I was experiencing. So again, that's a bad situation. If you're there, please feel free to reach out. Happy to send you some resources, things that can help. And this book that I mentioned, The Covert Passive-Aggressive Narcissist, so good, so good. If something in your gut told you that that book was right for you, just get it. Even if you try to analyze the person in your life and you think, oh, I'm not sure if they're a narcissist, just get the book, read it. I got the Kindle. It's not very expensive and it's a great investment. So just do it. So what is your inner compass? To me, it is that inner sense of knowing what is right and what is wrong for you. I think it's made up of not only your intuition, which kind of informs that inner knowing, but it's also kind of your personal power that helps you to act on it. So the inner compass is that intuition that tells you what's right, what's wrong, and then your personal power is what allows you to act on it. So what is it made up of? It's made up of your intuition, as I said, but I think your inner compass is also made up of your self-worth, because if you don't value yourself, you're not going to value your own opinions and you won't be able to trust yourself. You won't value your own perspectives. It's made up of your self-trust, of course. It's made up of your self-awareness, because that's what helps inform everything else, of really knowing yourself. It's made up of your self-talk. So if you're telling yourself constantly that you always make bad decisions, that you never know what to do, you never know what's right, that's going to affect your ability to actually make good decisions, even if, obviously, you're capable of making them. Self-acceptance is also part of it, because you need to accept yourself to trust yourself. And self-acceptance is a big part of self-knowledge, because it's accepting who you are. Self-respect is a part of your inner compass, because if you don't respect yourself, you're not going to respect your opinions, your perspectives, your decisions. And your values. I think knowing your values is really, really important in order to be able to make good decisions, because you need to know what is important to you. And again, this inner compass is all about what's right and wrong to you, not about what's right and wrong for society in general, what's right and wrong for your partner, for your family of origin. It's what is right for you. And this is not you being selfish. This is you knowing what's right for you so that you can act accordingly. And I think knowing yourself and accepting yourself and being yourself is a very huge part of this, because if you don't know yourself, how do you know what's right and what's wrong for you? Now, I've written a lot about self-knowledge and I've talked a lot about self-knowledge on this podcast, most recently with episodes 315, 316, and 317, where I talked about how to answer the question of who am I, how to answer the question of where am I, and how to answer the question of where am I going. And I'll link to these in the show notes, but it's 315, 316, 317. I think those are a really good introduction to working on developing your own sense of self-knowledge. But I think when you're doing this work, it's really important for me to remind you to look at yourself from a position of being open and curious, and trying not to judge yourself, I know a lot of us are really used to doing that, and so it can be really hard to move from a place of self-judgment to self-acceptance. And so if when you're on this journey of self-knowledge, you ever feel yourself judging yourself, just stop. Like, become aware of it, stop. Think about how you can look at this from a different perspective, that perspective of being open and curious and accepting this is who you are. Would you like to be different? Okay, then look at how you can change things if you want to. But judging ourselves is not really going to get us anywhere. It's just going to make us feel like crap, and it's going to damage our inner compass. So how to work on developing your inner compass? I think this is, of course, as I said, it's a journey of self-knowledge. And I have tons of resources on that, some of which I'm going to link to in the show notes. But I think it's also making different decisions and taking different actions in our everyday lives. So I think a lot of us, when we don't trust ourselves, me, for example, I used to always ask other people for their opinions because I didn't trust my own. I didn't trust my own perspective. So it was like I was always asking other people, like, what do you think? What should I do? What's your perspective on this? And I was putting more faith in other people's perspective when really I am the person who knows what's best for myself. So maybe don't ask for opinions while you're trying to shift this and develop your own inner compass. If you're really stuck, I don't know, do what's right for you. But I would say hold off on asking for other people's opinions. Don't trust other people more than you trust yourself. Don't place higher value on other people's opinions. So do what you need to do to make your decision, whether that's making a pros and cons list, but keep it to yourself and try, rather than as a knee-jerk reaction, reaching out and asking someone else first, try making the decision for yourself on your own. Of course, if you need other information, you can ask other people for further information or details, but try to make that opinion on yourself and try to not isolate yourself when making the decision, but try to shift how you make the decision in terms of just doing it like within yourself before you seek out other people's opinions. So another thing I would say is don't share too much with people who don't support you or who are fearful people in general, because that opens you up to the possibility of taking on other people's fears, which is not useful. So if you're trying to make a decision about something, again, sometimes even if we don't ask for other opinions, we'll share with someone, oh, I'm trying to decide, what to do here. I might do this, I might do that. Be very mindful of who you talk to and who you share your plans and your goals and your projects for the future with, because some people are just not going to support you because that's what they're like. And be aware of the people in your life who support you and who don't support you. Maybe sit down and make a list, because you need to know who to share your plans with and who not to. And make a list of the people who are really fearful, like unnecessarily fearful, that you don't share your plans with them. Because if you're having doubts about a plan or a project or a goal, and you share it with someone who is naturally fearful, they're going to project their fears onto you and give you a whole bunch of reasons why you shouldn't do this thing that you really want to do, when really it's their fear and it has nothing to do with you. And they might do it under the guise of trying to be helpful and trying to protect you. But again, it's their fears, not yours, so don't open yourself up to other people's fears. Know who you can share stuff with and who you can't. And be honest about that, because sometimes maybe your parents are really fearful and so they tend to tell you not to do things, or your best friend or your partner. Like, be honest about who you can't share this kind of stuff with, because expecting them to help you or support you when really they can't because they're too paralyzed by their own fears is not going to be useful to you. So be honest. Next, don't compare your choices or your decisions to other people's decisions. So every decision that we make in life takes us down a different path, and we keep refining and shifting and pivoting our path based on the choices and decisions that we make. Other people, even if they may have started on the same path as us, will have made different decisions. So stop comparing yourself to other people's decisions. And I've done a podcast episode on this. It's about how to quit the comparison game for good. And I'll share that in the show notes. That will be useful to you if you are the kind of person who really has a problem with comparing yourself. But just recognize the fact that you are on a different life path from other people. Now, if other people have an outcome that you want and don't have, then look at how you can get there from where you are. But it's all about what outcome you want for your life. But don't beat yourself up because you didn't make decisions that other people made. Start from now. This is where you are. So one thing that I think is important to do when you're working on developing your inner compass is to give yourself permission to make mistakes. Like, quit being a perfectionist. And if you have problems with perfectionism, recognize that and work on that. We're all going to make mistakes. And if you're not making mistakes, then maybe you're not taking enough action or you're not taking enough risks. Mistakes aren't the end of the world. They're how we learn. They're how we pivot. They're how we learn to make better mistakes. And when you make a mistake or you end up in a shitty situation in life, analyze what went wrong. Analyze what were the decisions that led you to that point and what you could have done differently so you can avoid making bad decisions again. This is all about learning. Learn by doing. Learn by taking action. And by taking action and by making mistakes, they're really useful. NLP, they always say there's no failure, there's only feedback. And I think that's a really, really important perspective. Mistakes are just feedback so that you can refine and make different decisions next time. Don't beat yourself up over this and do give yourself permission to make mistakes. Another thing that's really useful is to be still. And this is something that is a challenge for me, but I do try to add this to my schedule. I do try to be still, be quiet, meditate, or just sit and try to quiet my mind. Because I think that when we make time to be still, it helps us to connect with ourselves and to reconnect with ourselves. And it helps us with that journey of self-knowledge. So I think that being still is a really important part of developing our inner compass. Also, another thing to do is to make decisions based on love and not fear. So when you're making a decision, ask yourself, what am I feeling now? Am I feeling love? Am I feeling fear? Am I making the decision based on love or fear? What the heck does that mean? You know when you're feeling afraid. Like, you know when you're making a decision because you're afraid of something. You're afraid of what might happen. So if you're making a decision based out of fear and you recognize that, stop, calm, maybe write out like what's the worst that can happen if this decision goes wrong. Oftentimes, the fears that we have in our head are just ridiculous. It's like this escalating avalanche of like one thing leads to the other, which leads to the other, which ends in like total life chaos. And if we take the time to recognize this and maybe write them down on paper or in our journal, we realize how silly they are and we realize how exaggerated they are and we realize how unlikely they are to happen. So I think it can be really important to look at this, look at what we're afraid of. And then love is the opposite of fear. So just get in touch with your sense of self-love. And I know we're all still working on developing that. And I think just getting still again and just maybe having a nice cup of tea or doing something nice to yourself, getting yourself in a state of calmness will help you make that decision from a better spot. Also, do pay attention to your body. Pay attention to your gut feeling. When you're looking at making a decision, what does your gut say? I get a really, really strong gut feeling as to whether something is right or wrong for me. And I've gotten better at paying attention to that and taking action based on that gut feeling in recent years. I think many, many years ago, I would feel that gut feeling and ignore it. And that ended up in not great outcomes. So pay attention to your body, pay attention to your gut feeling, and take action accordingly. Also, surround yourself with the right people who support you. So I talked about not sharing opinions, not asking for opinions from people, not sharing with people who don't support you. Conversely, you want to surround yourself with the right people who support you because that's going to help you be yourself, live from your values, and make better decisions. So how do you trust yourself? I think all of these things that I've just mentioned help us to develop our inner compass, help us to trust yourself. And I think ultimately what you need to remember is that only you know what is best for yourself. Your partner knows what's best for your partner. Your friends know what's best for them. But the more you know yourself, the better you know yourself, the easier it will be for you to trust yourself. And the easier it will be for you to make decisions. And the easier it will be to live a life that is aligned with your values. And I think that's why it's so important for us to know our values. And I've got a blog post on this from ages ago, I think like 8 years old. And I'll link to that in the show notes because doing a values exercise is something that I find really useful to do on a regular basis. Not because my values necessarily change, but because I know myself better and better with each year. And so it's easier for me to really hone in on what my top values are. So if you've never done a values exercise, or if it's been more than a year since you did it, I encourage you to go to my blog post, which is linked in the show notes, and do it. It only takes a few minutes, but I think that will really, really help you to make better decisions and develop your inner compass and do what's right for you. Because ultimately, the whole point of developing your inner compass is so that you can make better decisions that you can for yourself, so that you can create the life that you want for yourself. Life is really short. I think it's really important to consciously make decisions, consciously create the life that we want to live, because not only does that make life more enjoyable, but I think it helps us evolve as souls so that we can have a better experience in future lives, hopefully, and develop ourselves, again, as souls. I do believe that we come back again and again, but that's no excuse to have a shitty life this time, because I think the more work we do, the more developed we are. So I hope you have found this useful. And if you want some help working on your self-trust, sign up for my Patreon. The $5 a month level will get you 4 done-for-you heart-centered energy work sessions, which will help you with self-love, self-trust, self-acceptance, which are all things that help with your inner compass. So if you go to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/Holly Worton, you can get done for you heart-centered energy work. There's all kinds of different tiers, which get to all kinds of different stuff. And I think that one is really, it's a good one because you don't have to invest the time in it. You get this done for you every week. So that's all for this week. Remember to visit the show notes at hollyworton.com/330. And in a week or two after that, the transcript will go up. Usually takes a couple weeks for those to go live. And that's a really good way to kind of review what you've listened to, because I know I'm not a very auditory learner. I learn more from reading. Some people learn more from listening. If you don't, the show notes are really useful to kind of review stuff that you've heard. And of course, links to all the stuff that I mentioned. So please drop me a line. Let me know what you thought about this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com or get in touch online. I am also always looking for topics for this podcast. I tend to talk about what's going on for me, what I've been thinking about, but I really, really love when listeners write in and give me ideas, because that lets me know what you're interested in hearing me talk about. So that's all for now. Remember to visit hollyworton.com/330 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.